I've talked about how all chronic fatigue syndrome authorities are frauds, complete frauds. Their negligence in looking into the incident that started this syndrome is proof enough of that. But it's compounded when a prototype for the syndrome approaches them, offers them evidence, and they grow angry, antagonistic, and reject that evidence. No, blaming my delivery doesn't cut it. A researcher really has to look into what they claim they want to solve. That's just a given. So after finding out that all chronic fatigue syndrome experts weren't what they appeared, that I thought maybe the mold community might be better. So in the middle 1990s, I switched over trying to get the mold community, which was just emerging at this time after the articles by Arnold Mann in 1997, which really brought awareness to toxic mold, put it on the map, and people were wondering if mold might have anything to do with this new syndrome. After all, it is a mold expert's obligation to wonder what the health effects of mold are. Since this new syndrome was unexplained, it seemed only natural that they'd want to know if mold was connected to this syndrome. So I began approaching them, and it was pretty much the same. I got a little bit of response, but then Dr. Shoemaker finally listened and put my story in his books. Now, I thought in 2005, when Mold Warriors was published, that was pretty much it. There's a chapter in there, Mold at Ground Zero for Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. Any mold researcher, any mold expert, anybody connected with mold would see that, and they would understand that mold was indeed connected to the syndrome, and they would know where to go to find out more. Well, it turns out Dr. Shoemaker was the only person who responded in that way. None of the people who saw mold at ground zero for chronic fatigue syndrome stepped up to connect the dots, come back, and put the pieces of the puzzle together. Well, I thought maybe they were just apathetic or incompetent or lazy or just didn't have their shit together. But after contacting so many of them and finding out that they had no intention at all of connecting their paradigm with the chronic fatigue syndrome, it's become clear that they were no better than the chronic fatigue syndrome people were. The mold experts were equally fraudulent, completely fraudulent. I mean, you cannot claim to be an expert in a field about which you do not want to know the history. That's kind of a minimum obligation. So as far as I'm concerned, once somebody turns down evidence, has a clear path to resolution of something, they should be disqualified as a researcher. And that goes for all chronic fatigue syndrome experts and all mold experts, all of them.